A lot of you have been asking me very similar questions, and I know because as promised, I read every single comment and email that you send me. Now, a couple months back, I had the pleasure of going on the Develop Yourself podcast, where Peter and I talked about my entire life, from the early beginnings to the college days to what I'm up to now. So sit back, relax, and enjoy an uncut, unfiltered view into my life. The episode is filled with philosophical questions as well as tangible pieces of advice. Thank you to Mailgun for sponsoring this video. We'll get to them in a bit. And I put timestamps to every single question I was asked, so feel free to jump around depending on what you're interested in. Let's get into it.
All right, Namanh, welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited for what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, man, me too. So the way I came across you, just as context for the audience, I guess, is YouTube tends to serve me up developer day in the life videos. And you had one that was great and was right on the front of my homepage. And so I clicked on it, great editing, and kind of realized you were just getting started with YouTube, and kind of through that saw a little bit more about your story and what you were up to. And so I'm excited that we get to have you on the podcast. I'm curious if you might not mind introducing yourself and just telling a little bit about what you do for those in the audience who might not be familiar with you.
Sure, yeah. So I can go way back and then I'll try to speed through to kind of where I am today. So yeah, my name is Namanh. I'm 23. I was born in New Delhi in India, actually, but it's where my heritage is, where my grandparents live. I've never actually lived there, but I visit quite frequently. And my dad used to work for an oil and gas company, so we actually traveled a lot. Like, I would move countries every 2 to 3 years, and I think that's actually very important to understanding who I am and pretty a core component of my identity. So I lived in Indonesia, Angola, Nigeria, Singapore, the US, Brazil, France, and then I would say the US is now home. I ended up coming back from Paris in 2014, and then I've been here ever since. So I did 2 years of high school, junior and senior year, and then I ended up going to Rice, where I studied computer science, and then did 4 years there. Texas is home, been in Texas ever since high school in Rice. Did a couple internships, a big oil and gas company called Schlumberger, then Microsoft, and then a startup in San Francisco called Gusto. And I'd kind of been going bigger and bigger in terms of companies, and then ended up doing that startup and really, really loved it. But they were also on that really growth inflection point. They had just raised another Series D round of funding. They were worth $2 billion, opened an office in New York. They had 3 headquarters. I think they were exceeding 500, 600 engineers. And so getting to Uber, Lyft, Airbnb stage where sometimes indistinguishable from another big company. And so I decided that I wanted to go somewhere smaller, and specifically I wanted to be in San Francisco. And this was pre-pandemic. San Francisco is where all the tech is. And so that was a pretty important part of my choice. And I wanted to be in fintech. You heard of Robinhood, Stripe, Brex, all these fintech companies popping up. I thought payments was a really, really cool space I could go deep in, and something that we as consumers use every day. Like, how do credit card transactions work? How does this stuff work behind the scenes? And so that kind of led to where I am today, and then ended up finding Bolt when they were just about 30 engineers. So it kind of fit the small startup vibe I wanted, and they were based out of San Francisco, and they were in fintech. So kind of the 3 things I was looking for. Joined them right after I graduated Rice in May of 2020, and I've been there ever since. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the overview. I definitely, you answered some questions I had about kind of growing up abroad and stuff, but might be interesting to dig into that. By way of additional context, can you say a little bit about what Bolt produces and what the product is?
Sure, yeah. So I'm going to try to do not like a sales pitch, but it's weird because the company has grown so much, and what we do is so different. And as startups pivot, and we try to figure out our identity and MVP and whatnot. When I joined Bolt, I think it's fair to say we were just a checkout company. So kind of one-click checkout, democratizing checkout, kind of that Amazon-like beautiful logged-in experience, but for the rest of the internet. So everything you love about Amazon, but everywhere else, basically. And we would say that our North Star was basically increasing revenue. So if our checkout was better, people would convert more, which means they would actually end up paying at the end. They wouldn't drop off, which means you as a merchant would make more money. And to the consumer, we'd say, hey, all those gray fields and forms and duplicate information you have to type every time. What if we just made that delightful? So that was kind of the offering to the B2B and the B2C. That was our core component. And then as the company grew, we realized that you can only make checkout so good, right? I mean, you have Apple, and I wouldn't say Apple's checkout is great, but if you want to buy a Mac, you're gonna buy it. You'll finish the checkout. And so we realized that our identity was not so much more making the best checkout, but really making a network around the rest of e-commerce. So you have all the big platforms like Shopify and Amazon and whatnot, but you have all these other independent retailers like H&M, JCPenney, and they're just kind of doing their own thing. How can we bring them together and give everyone a consolidated, beautiful checkout experience? And today, I think our core offering is this network. Essentially, you become part of a Bolt network as a shopper and as a merchant. And to a merchant, we basically say, look, we're the middleman in that payment system, and so we can offer you a bunch of insights and make your checkout experience like optimized and beautiful, because we don't care who you're using, why you're using them. We're just going to be like your checkout experts. And to the consumer, we're basically saying is, you might have a Brooks Brothers account, an H&M account, a Forever 21 account. Why do you have so many accounts? They all have the same information: address, credit card, name, date of birth. Why can't you just have one Bolt account that can be your checkout identity for your entire e-commerce? And that's kind of where we are today. And so we definitely think like the Bolt account and the Bolt network is our North Star.
Got it. That makes sense. So to kind of state the problem a different way, say, I'm a consumer and I, am on some Shopify store, let's say Allbirds. My Allbirds login is different than some other place that uses Shopify, right? And so there's a ton of friction involved with logging in, maybe my credit card isn't saved, et cetera, et cetera. So if I'm understanding correctly, the problem Bolt is solving for the consumer is drastically simplifying that, kind of having universal checkout. And it sounds like for businesses, you're offering them essentially a lot of data information, maybe consulting isn't the right way to put it, but ways to kind of optimize that flow and just to help conversions, essentially. Is that fair?
Yeah, and again, definitely not a spokesperson for the company. I know the CEO might hate me if I'm not doing a good job representing the company, but I'd say the one thing I would amend is Bolt is platform agnostic. So, Shopify can give you a beautiful experience, but only if you're a Shopify merchant on the Shopify network. You can use Stripe as a payment processor, and they'll give you a beautiful checkout, and you'll get all the cool things with Stripe. But let's say you get a better contract somewhere else. Now what do? You've integrated with Stripe. They're like your source of truth. Now you have to go do everything again, repeat with someone else. With Bolt, you kind of just connect with us once, and you get everything else for free. So think about, like, the good example I use is Plaid. Before Plaid existed, you as a merchant would have to go integrate with every bank by yourself. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Capital One. There might be some like Namanh Bank in India that just popped up. Well, you have to go send some developer to, figure out their APIs. And stuff is always changing. So maybe they come up with a V2 API. Now what do? Like, you are a e-commerce company. You should just care about clothes and shipping. You don't care about checkout. Now, with
Right.
Plaid, you connect to Plaid, and then they just keep integrating with people, and you just get them for free. And Plaid kind of covers all of that. So Bolt is very similar, but for e-commerce. We don't care if you use Shopify, WooCommerce, Magento 2, BigCommerce. We don't care if you use Stripe, Braintree, Adyen, Klarna, PayPal. You just connect with Bolt once, and you get everything else like a SaaS product for free for the rest of your life.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think the platform agnostic piece is definitely important. So very cool idea, obviously really needed. Once you hear the idea, I think it's kind of like, oh, of course. So sounds like there's been a lot of growth in your time there. I think it might be good to start a little bit earlier though. So I was watching one of your videos and you were kind of going through your 10-year history of learning to code and starting in high school when you were in France. So I'm curious if coding is something that you kind of always wanted to do, or if you were maybe just looking for some electives when you took those first classes in high school and thought it sounded fun. Kind of what was the origin of your interest in coding?
Yeah, definitely the latter. So I think by chance. No one in my family had ever done it. My dad was an accountant. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I was the oldest in the family, so it wasn't like I had a sibling doing something similar. We had laptops at home and whatnot, but it was mostly like Microsoft Word, Excel. It was never, I wouldn't say my dad was like teaching me how to code when I was 4 or whatnot. Purely by chance. It was honestly something I was like, oh, websites. I mean, I use them. It'd be cool to learn how to create them. And there was this aspect of instant gratification. Like, HTML, CSS is brutal, but you can just right now be like H1 tag heading and it'll just pop up, and that's beautiful. And you can like own a domain and people can see that instantly. So I realized like a lot of this stuff was more accessible than I thought, and this is definitely learnings now. When I was a 12-year-old, I wasn't thinking about all this, so definitely just for fun. I think it was just like really neat, and then it kind of built upon each other. Every class I took, I got more and more interested in the stuff I was learning.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's cool to have kind of a gateway like that. I think number one, being a little bit younger, and number two, kind of more out of interest than most of the people that I work with are kind of realizing like, oh, I don't like my career. And so it's kind of more like means to end, which is totally fine. I feel like code is a tool like any other in a lot of ways, but yeah, it's cool to hear kind of the high school story. In the same video, you talked about kind of going through college and struggling at the beginning. I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. So I'm curious, you kind of went from really struggling at the beginning. Sounds like you kind of figured things out about halfway through, and then you did a master's and a bachelor's in 4 years. So I want to dig in there, and I'm curious what some of the lessons were or some of the things that you learned along the way that kind of helped you to go from struggling, maybe not doing as well as you wanted, to kind of hitting your stride by the end of college.
Yeah. I think one thing was definitely a mindset shift, and this is what everyone will tell you, like, again, depends if you want to go to graduate school, but programming, many times, like, grades don't matter. And people would tell me this, but my entire identity was grades, being Indian in high school, I was an A student, I wanted to get the best grades, and so coming to college, I was like, well, I'm just going to continue that. Even if you say grades don't matter, hey, I mean, if I get A's, it's like, it'll be good, right? And so I tried pretty hard, and then there was a pretty quick reality check where I realized that maybe I couldn't get A's anymore. And initially I was like super distraught. I mean, I was failing exams. I was doing below average. I was like, at least let me be average. Like, I used to be such a good student. At least let me be average. And there were just so many insanely talented, not even programmers, I would say computer scientists, like people that were just good at math, algorithms. Like they would take a discrete math course with me and they would just get it. And I just wouldn't get it. And, I'd always been used to just working a little bit harder and catching up, but at some point there's like a limit. And so I realized that's okay. And so the mindset shift was basically, I told myself, as long as I'm doing my best and I'm enjoying it, I'm okay. If that means I'm getting a C or a B or an A, that's fine. And I'm just going to take all the hard classes, even if it means my GPA is going to get destroyed. And that's okay. I'm just going to take all the hard classes I can. I'm here in college to learn. I know I don't want to go to graduate school. I want to go to industry. At the end of the day, it's not going to matter. If anything, I'm just going to have to do interview prep. So let me just like learn everything I can. And the number 2 thing is meet as many smart people as I can. So if there's a person who's getting A's and I'm getting C's, that's great. Like, let me be around them because they're doing something right. I can kind of soak that in. I can become their friend. I can learn from them. And that's been a constant in my life. I've always tried to be around the smartest people I can. Like, I always want to be the dumbest person in the room.
Yeah, such great points. I think it's kind of ironic, right? It sounds like by focusing on learning and not on grades, your grades actually got better. And I know for myself, like I went through a coding boot camp and I was very worried about not passing the boot camp. And I feel like that kind of puts you in a defensive mindset where it's like you're doing the bare minimum to get the result you want rather than embracing the process. And so you kind of end up shooting yourself in the foot inadvertently. So that's really interesting that you had kind of a similar experience. I'm curious how that kind of coincides with your internship experiences. So in the same video, you mentioned that you had the internship at the oil and gas place after freshman year, and then sophomore year you were at Microsoft, and you said it was easy and fun, but after that you were kind of doubting your abilities to succeed in a professional environment. So I'm curious if that kind of overlapped with around the time where things started to pick up for you academically.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't say I think it might have been coincidence. And so, like, I think the one thing I remember is, like, so I did my summer internship, and it was like more corporate. You wear pants, you wear trousers and a shirt. You wake up at 8, you go to work. There's no free lunch. Not all the perks you hear with all these big companies. But I was a freshman, and so I was just grateful. Like, someone took a chance on me. I was getting paid. I mean, that was huge. I was like, okay, I'll take what I can get. I was in Houston, and I was like, okay, I hear of all these cool cities. I want to get out. And Microsoft is known to have they invented the internship. They invented the idea of paying non-full-time people a salary, even if a full-time engineer can do their work in 1 week, and make it really, really fun. And so I specifically picked Microsoft because I knew it was going to be fun. And that summer, my only goal was to have a lot of fun. Like, I had an income. I just wanted to do everything. So I went to events, I did all this stuff. And so what I didn't focus on was programming. And so I can never hold it against Microsoft. The reason that summer was fun and I didn't ship that much to production was because it was a conscious choice I had made. My team, they were pushing me. I could have. I just chose not to. I just chose to explore Seattle, hang out with people, soak in the internship. And I came back and I was exhilarated and I was like, this was amazing. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I was like, but wait, I only did half of it. I didn't actually code. And when I'm going to be a full-time employee, I'm going to get all these like beautiful perks in a beautiful city of Seattle, but I'm also going to have to write code. And I didn't do any of that. And I don't even know if I can. I can do some programming assignments, but in industry, it's very different. And so I had kind of a midlife crisis, and I was like, maybe I should just go to PM so I can kind of get that second half without having to write code. I can just go to meetings. I'm a people person. I can talk pretty well. That might be interesting. But then I was like, wait, like you've never shied away from a challenge. Like, are you just leaving because you're not sure? And so then I really tried that year to try to get good and then also secure an internship where I would not be able to just have a lot of fun. Like a smaller place you can get by with doing. You can't get by doing less. And so I needed that accountability.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dig into that. That all makes sense. I think the next internship is super interesting and something that a lot of our audience will probably be able to relate to. So can you say a little bit about kind of the process of ending up at Gusto?
Before I answer this question, let's talk about Mailgun, how modern companies work with email. And I'm happy to say we actually use Mailgun at Bolt. The platform's ease of use, world-class support, and powerful APIs empower smart development teams to reach real customers at scale. With Mailgun, you can send and track your transactional and marketing messages effortlessly. And in an age of spam, you can easily prevent fake signups and remove invalid email addresses from your list quickly. Today, Mailgun helps hundreds of thousands of companies and leading brands around the world to provide connected experiences and drive smart results. Through its powerful email API and intuitive email marketing solutions, Mailgun controls the entire email lifecycle from pre-development through delivery for companies like DHL, Wikipedia, Toast, Lyft, and Microsoft. Try Mailgun today with my special link, mailgun.com/Namanh. Now, let's talk about my junior year internship at Gusto. Yeah, sure. So what I did, the mindful choice I made was I declined my Microsoft return offer before I had anything else. Because I knew if I did that, then I wouldn't have this like comfortable thing I could end up with. Because I knew if I did that, I would just been lazy and I wouldn't pass anywhere. And then I would have been like, well, I have no offers, so I might as well go back to Microsoft. And so I declined it. I mean, I tried to push it. I was like, hey, can you give me till December 1st? They said, no, we're pretty hard. I said, okay, then I'm just going to decline. And then I was like, I had nothing. So then I started scrambling. I applied everywhere. I hit up people. And then some of my friends had done the Kleiner Perkins Fellowship. And they connect you to startups. And so I applied to the Kleiner Perkins Fellowship. I got to become a finalist. I interviewed a bunch of their portfolio companies. I ended up getting an offer at Coursera through the Kleiner Perkins Fellowship. But Coursera was in Mountain View or Palo Alto, one of the South-based cities. And I wanted to be in San Francisco proper. And so then I was like, okay, this is great. I'm a KP fellow. I can go to Coursera. But again, like maybe I can squeeze something in San Francisco. And this was like right around Thanksgiving. So I knew I basically had 2 weeks before everyone was going to go off for the holidays. I had to secure something. And I think I just cold emailed Gusto. Or it was by chance I got a first round interview. And then I told them like, look, I have a week. I need to get everything done. And so I did my entire process in a week from the first round to the final round and then ended up getting an offer. And they kind of gave me everything I wanted. They were in San Francisco. They were still part of the KP Fellowships. And so I accepted. And that's where I ended up for that summer.
Great. Yeah, that is a super interesting process. I respect the boldness to decline the Microsoft offer and kind of not have a fallback. It sounds like it was kind of a pivotal decision and that it worked out. The next step, though, is that you ended up at Gusto and you were the only engineer on your team with one designer and one PM, if I'm correct. And you ended up shipping the calendar feature, which is still in use today. And it's one of the only features that's in the nav bar throughout the whole site you mentioned. So I think that transition is really interesting. And I know I've been in similar positions before where, you join a company, you're the only engineer on a team, and it's kind of do or die. And you mentioned before you hadn't shipped that much to production. So I'm curious what happened that summer, what changed that summer? Was it just the stress of wanting to perform that kind of galvanized you to getting that done? Or did you have some kind of realization throughout the process that kind of enabled you to kind of take the leap and begin to ship and figure that big feature out?
Yeah, I think one thing that was really top of mind for me was I wanted to be respected in my craft. And it's something that I felt like huge imposter syndrome from. I mean, I was deciding to switch to PM just because I didn't want to. I thought I was a terrible coder. And so one thing I really wanted to work on that summer was I wanted, by the time I left, for my mentor, someone to be like, yep, that's a competent engineer. Not a rock star, not a senior engineer, nothing crazy, but like, yep, that's someone who can code. They can do a full-time engineering job. And so at Gusto, the cool thing was you had little pods. So my team had a bunch of engineers, but each pod was basically a collaborative effort with a PM, a designer, and an engineer. And so I kind of had my own pod where I was the engineering lead. I had a mentor, but for the calendar, the designer was drawing up some mocks, the PM was talking about what needed to be done, and I was actually the only person who had to code it. And so if I didn't code it, nothing would be deliverable by the end of the summer. And so one thing was definitely this external validation, where if I had nothing to show for my work, it'd be pretty obvious I didn't do anything, or, for some reason I failed. And the second was this internal desire to just get good. And so I worked really hard that summer. I would come in, at 9 a.m., I would write a lot of code. I would leave at 6 p.m., and it helped that they gave us dinner if you stayed a little bit longer. But then it also helped that a lot of the other interns were also working really hard, and people really took it seriously. And it was a small place, so you got to ship really fast. There weren't that many processes. You didn't really have to wait around. You were the only person holding yourself back. And so in an environment like that, where my speed was just mine to choose, there was nothing stopping me. I got to write a lot of code. And I got really lucky with the project that I got assigned. And it still lives on Gusto's top nav bar. An intern basically wrote all that, which is super cool. And a couple companies and opportunities have actually used Gusto. And so sometimes I'll pop into Gusto and see my own work, which is super cool. And then it's become better and better, and people have kind of built on it. But I can say I built the V1 Gusto calendar, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, such a cool experience. And I imagine having gone through that, you must have been confident after that summer that you could actually do this in a professional environment and get a job after college.
Yeah, 100%. The job stuff, I gotten pretty good at recruiting at this point. After you've done it for 2-3 years, you kind of understand what you need to do. And once you have Microsoft in your resume, and it gets easier and easier the older you get. But definitely the latter, yes. I was look, I can join a 10-person startup and, maybe I can do the work. It was still a maybe. I always feel like an imposter. I feel like that's something that never leaves you. But I felt confident, kind of being a peer-to-peer with some of these other respected engineers.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm glad you brought up interviewing. That's something I definitely wanted to touch on, because you got a bunch of offers after college. And I know kind of everybody wants to know, how do you get the job, right? And I also have a YouTube channel, and my most popular videos by far are about interviewing. And then you look at companies like AlgoExpert, for example, completely bootstrapped, doing millions of dollars a year, just because people have this hunger to get in and get the job and do well on those interviews, and it has such a financial impact as well. So I'm curious if you have maybe some tips or tactics or things that you figured out along the way that enabled you to get so many offers when you were finally done with school.
Yeah, and I definitely want to make a YouTube video on this too, but one, luck, and two, it's a numbers game. And the older you get, the more, I guess, virtue signaling you have. If you went to an Ivy League or you have Microsoft in your resume, the easier it gets, obviously. But at the end of the day, it's just a numbers game. So I ended up getting 9, 10 offers, but that's because I applied to 500 companies. So if you do the percentage on that, it's a very minuscule percentage. And I failed way more offers than I ended up getting. So, let's say I applied to 500 places. And the important thing there is not just applying online. Of all those places, trying to find someone I knew, trying to get an internal referral, trying to get the recruiter's email, getting some human to read my resume. That's the most important thing. If a human can read my resume, I've already passed a bunch of stages. And everything on your resume basically gets you a seat at the table, which is to get that first interview. After that first interview, everything is a meritocracy, or we hope it's a meritocracy. But there's so much stuff that happens before you even get that interview, which you have to navigate through. And the best way is just to apply as many places as you can and get that human touch. Reach out to a friend, reach out on LinkedIn, guest recruiter emails, go to career fair, go to tech fairs, and write an email, get someone to read it. And then after that, it's kind of like that algorithms and data structures. And I am not the smartest person. I did not do as much lead code as I should have. But because I was applying to so many places, it meant I was doing so many interviews. And if you're doing 100 interviews, you're going to pass 2 or 3 of them. Just because you got lucky, you knew the question, it was a good day, whatever. Maybe you've seen the question before, whatnot. And so I didn't get all those offers because I studied any harder. It's just I grinded a little bit more to kind of get through that black hole that is all these internal applications, until I could at least show my face and be on that interview. And then from there, it was on me.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And the human touch is so important. My co-host, Aaron, and I are both really big proponents when we're speaking with students of being extremely targeted in that way in the job search, and not just kind of submitting resumes blindly, but really trying to figure out who are the decision makers. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm curious if you have tips for kind of after that point, when you get to the technical piece, maybe not specifics, because as you said, you never know what's going to come up in terms of algorithms and data structures. And that's a place where I'm weak anyway. Most of my jobs have been kind of oriented around specific frameworks and things. But I'm curious if you have tips for when you're in that kind of whiteboarding scenario, what are things you can do to help show your thought process or your skills beyond just solving the problem correctly?
Yeah, so there's a lot of like really cool frameworks you can look up. I think my favorite one was, or kind of what I made my own, was you read the problem and then you just state all your assumptions out loud. So you know, the problems are usually open-ended on purpose. Like, let's say the interview question is, I don't know, converting a Roman numeral to an integer or something, like a classic LeetCode question. You know, ask, like, how big can the Roman numeral get? Is there a character limit? You know, I don't even know if Roman numerals can be negative, but, you know, say it. Like, just tell the interviewer everything you can think of. Because at the end of the day, think about who they're trying to hire. They're trying to hire someone who's going to think about all the edge cases, anything that can break their code. So, like, external client doesn't come up and they're like, hey, why is this broken? And it's like, hey, you didn't think about this as deeply as you should have. So, you know, is a Roman numeral 0? Is there an equivalent for 0? Are there going to be positive integers? Is there a cap? Say everything. And then let them kind of make it easier for you. And same thing with when you get stuck. And I got stuck a lot. It's okay to just say you're stuck, or, you know, be a little bit more tact with how you say you're stuck. Try a little bit, try to get help and whatnot. But sometimes I would just straight up be like, yeah, I think I need a hint. I think I've exhausted everything I can. And remember, an interview is a collaborative experience. You want to work with someone who's willing to say, I don't know what's going on. Can you help me a little bit? Or, you know, is this someone you want to code with, pair program with? And so that's something that definitely helped me, realizing that it's okay if I didn't know what was going on. We can kind of come to a solution together. And my most successful interviews were, and the interviewer also plays a part in this, right? Like, if they're not going to say anything the entire interview, there's not much you can do, and that's just unfortunate and not a good representation of how interviews should be. But a good interviewer will step in, chime in, be a friendly person, someone like you'd want to work with. And so interviews go both ways.
Yeah, great point. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you in some ways. But yeah, I'm big on that as well. Just kind of saying what you're thinking, just because as an interviewer and as someone who's done a lot of interviewing, it's hard to know. Obviously, we're not mind readers, so whenever you can turn it into a conversation, I think that is kind of for the best. So that's great. And then, so you got all these offers. We talked a little bit about Bolt and why you were interested in Bolt in the first place. I'm curious what you're working on these days. So obviously, Bolt has several different aspects and products. And so what's your day-to-day look like?
Sure, yeah. And the day-to-day today has definitely changed from when I joined. When I joined, we were about 30 engineers, much, much smaller. My team had 8 people. Now my team is an org, and so I'm in a sub-team of the org. But yeah, I worked on the financial products team. I'm still on financial products, but today I'm on a sub-team called payments infrastructure, which is kind of like the very back-end heavy stuff of payments, right? Like our ledger, our fees, how transactions work. And today, actually, I'm working on SOA, which is a system architecture, where we're basically trying to break up our monolith payments infrastructure into a microservice. So anyone else at Bolt can just hit, you know, payment.authorize, payment.capture, payment.void, payment.whatever. And so that's been really interesting, kind of identifying dependencies in our code base, abstracting away models, and bringing everything into like financial product ownership. And then eventually kind of breaking that off into its own service. So we're definitely on the very preliminary phases of it, but it's been a pretty cool infrastructure challenge, something I've never worked on before.
Yeah, definitely sounds very interesting. And like there's also a lot of domain-specific knowledge. So given that you said you were interested in payments and finance and fintech, I think that'd probably be pretty great. I'm curious, so you mentioned in a video that you guys are doing some Golang on the back end and other things. So I'm curious now, given all your experience, how you approach learning on the job and learning in general, picking up new technologies. Do you have any tips or frameworks or tactics you use for that?
Yeah. Google is your friend. I Google a lot every single day. I barely know what I'm talking about. So, you know, copy pasting errors, Stack Overflow, you know, all that. But also just ask a lot of questions. There are a lot of people that you can learn from that are way smarter than I am, and they've been in the industry way longer. So just get some time on their calendar. Ask questions. If someone sends you a PR to review, don't just approve it. Just ask questions. It's okay. Just put comments. Even if you're not the primary approver, just be like, what is this? Why is this? Even if they're dumb questions, you're only going to get smarter because you ask them. And so ask a lot of questions, but then also just read a lot of code. And I talk about this in my most recent video, but even senior engineers are just doing what you can do. Like, no one actually knows the entire code base by the back of their hand. They're just like better at navigating it, looking up the right terms, knowing what to search for, and you only get better at that by reading a lot of code. So code written well is like a story. You should be able to very easily understand how everything is working with correct variable names and whatnot. And that's, again, ideal. No one actually does it perfectly, but you should be able to just step into stuff and be like, oh, it's calling this, then we do this, then we do that. Okay, that makes sense. Then we do this. In this error case, we do that. So read a lot of code and then, write a lot of code. It's like an instrument, right? The more you practice, the better you'll get. So just write more lines of code, read more lines of code, and you're going to end up becoming a better programmer.
For sure. And so much of that is just hard won by experience. I was comparing this in an interview the other day to that Captain Sully movie where, when he has to land the plane in the Hudson, it flashes back to all these experiences he had along the way where things went wrong and just kind of like accumulated over time this sixth sense of just knowing whether or not it would work. So I find that that's a similar experience with coding. That's the technical side. You spoke, I think, in your most recent video about kind of the soft skills side, the importance of writing. So I'm wondering if you might touch on kind of what are the characteristics that set an engineer apart aside from just knowing how to code well?
Yeah, I think the communication skills are extremely important. And the one we talk about a lot is verbal communication, people skills. But I think the thing we don't talk about a lot is writing. And especially in a more increasingly remote asynchronous work, writing is so important. And as a company gets bigger, people might forget your name, they might forget what you said in meetings, there might be like Zoom recording somewhere in a cloud that no one's clicking, but your documents are going to live forever. And if you've authored a document, people 5 years from now might be like, hey, why did we break this up into a microservice? There's a document Namanh wrote, let's read it, let's try to understand where they were coming from. And so writing succinctly well in a way that people can understand is an art, and it's something you only get better as you do more of. And it's something that I think a lot of people forget about. And so every type of writing, responding to a Slack message, there's like so many ways you could do it. And I say in my last video, when I first joined Bolt, I would do it like I was chatting with a friend on Messenger. I would just be like, trains of thought, hey, that doesn't make sense, actually wait, never mind, sorry, oh no, wait, and I'd just be like contradicting myself. And I can only imagine someone reading these trains of thought would be like, what is this guy talking about? And so now, someone responds, okay, I take a minute, as if I'm writing an email. I really try to bring down what is the core component, what is the question I have, what concerns do I have, use bullet points, and then send a message so they can really quickly grasp what I'm trying to say. And so I think working on these skills are going to be really, really important, if not even more, that we're getting so remote.
Yeah, I'm so big on it, and I've always been kind of the mind that coding is only part of it, partly because I feel like I'm a little bit more naturally gifted in soft skills than as an engineer. And so it's advantageous for me to emphasize those things. But I think you're right that in this new remote world that communication is even more important than it used to be, given that you don't have a lot of the context of intonation, tone of voice, facial expressions that we used to have. So that's really good stuff. Changing subject a little bit, taking a little bit of a left-hand turn, I'm curious about some of the other videos on your channel. So you've talked a little bit about investing. And so I'm curious, I guess, number one, how you learned what you know about investing. And number two, kind of what your motivation is. Is it kind of more like this is smart and good to do with money? Or is there kind of a grander vision behind investing for you?
Yeah, sure. So I always forget his name. I think his name is Peter Lynch. He used to be the fund manager of the Magellan Fund, which was, I think still is, the top performing mutual fund ever in his 30 or 40 years that he ran it. And so I remember I just graduated college. I wanted to give myself multiple months before starting a job, but it was COVID and I couldn't travel, no senior trip. So I was like, okay, I'll give myself a couple weeks. I'll try to read some books, chill out. And one of the books I picked up was one by him. I forget what the name is exactly, but he talks about how anyone can invest, and investing doesn't always have to be about numbers. Like, your gut feeling and your experiences as a customer are equally as important. And he talks about examples like Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks. He's like, I invested in Dunkin' Donuts because I went in and the coffee tasted the same every time. And every time I went, I got the right donut, the right coffee, and I just loved the experience. And How do you know? Like, they started popping up everywhere. Same with Domino's. Like, Domino's was such a good investment. I think it outperformed Fang in a couple of years because you just get that consistent Domino's experience. You get the same tasting pizza. It tastes pretty good. It's hot and fresh. It shows up, and there's no math or numbers behind that. That's just you as a customer loving the experience. And so I was like, okay, cool. I don't have an investment background. I didn't study finance, but I know what I like. I think I know some good companies like Nike and Amazon, and they do things that are good. And I don't know why they're good, but I feel happier shopping there. So maybe I can like pick some of these companies. And that's kind of my like picking specific stocks, but most of my portfolio is long-term investments and just index funds. And kind of going back to what you said is just things I knew I should be doing. And I was like, well, then I'll do it. Like, I have an income. I'm staying at home. I'm not spending much money. I might as well invest it. So I read a couple books, and then with a lot of things in life, I feel like the easy solution is actually the correct solution, right? Like, you want to lose weight, just go to the gym. There's no like crazy formula. You want to have growth in the market, then just put your money in and leave it. Don't touch it. Easy. There's no gimmick. There's no like TikTok trend. Just do the bare minimum. Do what's simple and easy, and it's probably what you should be doing. And that's kind of my motto with investing. So that's basically what I do.
Cool. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to me. I'm kind of the index fund mindset anyway. So, and I like things to be simple. I don't like to do a whole lot of thinking about systems or anything. So makes a lot of sense to me. The simpler, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Taking another left turn. So I want to talk about YouTube. You have a video where you mentioned that Bolt has a 4-day work week, and that as part of that extra day of weekend, I don't know if you consider it that, but the Fridays off, basically, you're investing some of that time in your YouTube channel. So I'm curious about what your motivation was for getting started with YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. So I never used to be a big consumer of YouTube content until recently. I think it might be because COVID, you're home more often. I used to watch Netflix and a lot of TV and whatnot, but my brother used to consume it a lot, and my brother loved gaming, and so there's huge gaming community on YouTube, and my brother would watch a lot of videos like Minecraft, League of Legends, all these games he loved, and I was always like, you play these games too, why don't you record yourself? Like, they're not doing anything different, they're just playing the game and talking, you can do that too. And he always told me, it's way harder than you think, like, you're simplifying it, and I was like, no, you're just lazy. And long story short, YouTube is hard. It is a lot of effort. I definitely did overly simplify it, but I do still believe what I told him was true, that anybody can do it. And, your life experiences are unique. And I always thought that they weren't. I was like, everything I'm saying, everyone knows. So why do they want to hear it from me? Peter Lynch is writing an investing book. Why are you going to come listen to Namanh talk about investing? But I realized that everyone has unique perspectives. And I've been really big about sharing my experiences with people. And I think that goes back to, I had moved a lot. So I was a new kid like 9 times, taking the bus for the first time. I was always new, and a lot of my life has been making other people feel accepted and feel welcome and being like, hey, I'm just like you. No one is better. You can do it too. And I think video is just such a cool platform. It can touch so many people across the entire world. And so I started off with blogging, writing, and then I would do a lot of one-on-one sessions, like my mom would be like, hey, talk to your cousins and stuff. And I was like, kind of like Khan Academy's origin story. I was like, well, if I can just record myself, then other people can hear it too. And that was kind of the impetus for YouTube. And then from a more personal level, I thought video making, filmography, storytelling was so cool, and something that I never thought I was particularly good at, and something I wanted to work towards. And I'd never edited anything. I didn't know what Final Cut Pro was. Everything was so foreign and scary to me. And I try to, like, anything that's scary to me, I try to face it head on. And so it's kind of how it started. And I was like, all right, my brother said, you can't do it, so I'm going to do it. And here I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that proving people wrong is good for that kind of initial fire. It's interesting you mentioned not feeling like you're good at filmography, editing, etc., because I think your videos are really good, really well edited. So I'm curious if you had a particular strategy for learning how to edit, or is it just kind of seeing what you liked, putting in the hours, trying to replicate, or maybe a course? How did that look?
Yeah, no course, completely self-taught, a lot of copying, and imitation is the best form of flattery. And so there are so many amazing YouTubers, and I don't even think I'm a fraction as good. Crazy transitions, beautiful music, just such beautiful cinematography. And my first video, I'm going to say, is probably not the best if you go back and watch it, but my only goal was every video I wanted to be a little bit better, and I had a focus for every video in that I wanted to imitate something different. Like I didn't want to do one video that imitated everything because I just couldn't do that, right? These people have done it for 2-3 years. They're just way better than me. And so I was like, okay, my first video had no music. I was like, all right, how do you use music? Like what music? When do you put it in? Like, should it be loud? Should it be soft? Okay, so one video I'm only going to do music. Then one video I was like, all these people have stock footage and they kind of interlay stuff, so maybe it's boring if I'm just talking to the camera. So I'm just going to do that. I'll just use a bunch of stock footage, and I want it to be really fast paced with like a drum beat in the back and kind of like da 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 da. All right, that's the next video. Third video, I was like, okay, I want to like slow it down a little bit, maybe like do a storytelling, and that was my first 10 years video where I was like, I want to write a script and like try to tell a story rather than just like facts. So instead of 5 benefits you should care about, just kind of like, here's my life story. And so the focus of that video was just storytelling. And then slowly, as I kind of got better at each thing, I started intertwining them. So my most recent video has storytelling and music, no stock footage. Maybe my third one will have like all of them. And so slow and steady, just kind of intertwining things I was learning to try to get to where I want to be.
Yeah, the strategy makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me of that old James Clear, if you get 1% better every day, at the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better. And I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of isolate one aspect. I feel like that's a very engineering mindset and approach for it. And it's clearly working. So well done there. I'm curious what kind of the long-term aspiration for the channel is. Is it just to reach people, to help people, maybe another stream of income? Like, what are your thoughts for the future on it?
Yeah, I'd say it was never financially motivated because, just to be like honest with myself, I knew how hard it is, like what is it, 1% or 0.1% end up making it. So I was kind of just like, this is going to be my side hobby, a creative pursuit. Sometimes in engineering, you don't get many aspects to do that. And so, this will be my like creative outlet. And if I can kind of share my life with people and help them, I think that'd be awesome. And then this like community aspect is something I definitely underrated. I'd always thought, Discord, community, these are all just buzzwords. It's not true, but it's kind of cool to like touch people's lives and hear them comment and say that you're making a difference and they relate to what you're saying. And if you can help them be a little bit better, I think that's like really fulfilling. And so it makes me feel really good, which is something that everyone enjoys. You want to be happy, and so it's some sort of like fulfillment and creative outlet, some combination of the two. In terms of like long-term vision, I'm not sure yet. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't think I had a niche. There's so many tech channels, and so I kind of just did a little bit of everything. There's some like sketches on there. There's some storytelling. I don't really know. It's something I'm still trying to figure out. But I think probably just talking more about my life experiences, I think, is probably the journey for at least the next few months.
Got it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I can relate to having, comments where people say this really helped me or this made a big impact on me is enough in and of itself for me most of the time. It's just very cool that this medium connects us to so many people across the earth. On the note of kind of having a vision, I'm just curious where you see yourself going in your career in terms of being an engineer. Do you have any kind of roadmap or place where you feel like you'd like to be in, the next few years?
Yeah. It changes every day. I have all these crises and I'm like, am I doing the right thing? But I think one thing I do know for sure, a realization I've come to this year, is that I want there to be more to me than just engineering. And for a while, that was all who I was. My only title was software engineer. Namanh was the engineer. He wrote code. That was it. I wanted there to be like other bullets under who is Namanh, like a brand that transcends both or engineering. And YouTube is definitely one way that has helped me with that, having like an external brand of who I am. But I do know one thing, I don't want work to be my entire life. And so I want to be a software engineer and I want to code for a long, long time. I don't plan on retiring young or early at all. But I don't want that to be the only thing I'm doing. And so I really want to focus on some of this creative outlets too, because it fulfills me in ways in ways that coding doesn't sometimes, and ways I kind of didn't realize it can. And I get it now why people do art and study the humanities. It's like really fulfilling in another way. And so I think long term, definitely want to write a lot of code, make a lot of more YouTube videos, and one day hopefully maybe start my own company is something that I've always wanted to do, has always been in the back of my mind, and I'm kind of trying to find opportunities that place me on the best path to eventually get there. Got it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and sounds like you're definitely on the right track in terms of where you want to go. So way to go there. It's all very cool to me. And yeah, you've had a ton of experience. So as we kind of get towards the end of our conversation, I'm curious if you might have maybe like your biggest piece of advice for the audience, knowing that these are people that a lot of them want to be where you are as an engineer at a startup, making great money, using these skills, hopefully to make an impact on the world. What would you tell somebody that kind of wants to follow the same path?
Yeah, so I think there are two types of people in the world. There are people that are inherently smart, and then there are people that just work harder. And so I would say identify which one you are, because I've met some prodigies and they can do a leak code hard instantly and they pass every interview they've ever done. And so what I would tell them is very different. I would just say, keep doing it. And then there are people like me who cannot do that. And they just have to work a little bit harder, which means grind a little bit more. Email a recruiter, follow up one more time, hit up a connection. Even if it seems awkward, just do every little thing you need to do to kind of catch up with all the people that are already there or just kind of comes naturally to them. And it's fake it till you make it. And the more you do, the better you'll get. And then one day there'll kind of be a blurring between these two types of people, and then you'll just kind of become a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Namanh, this has been so good. Anything else you want to say to the audience? Any place you want to direct the audience as we're wrapping up here?
No, I think, yeah, I mean, the internet is a beautiful place. There is so much content out there. I'm not going to self-promote myself, but you can look me up. And, if you like my videos, definitely let me know, feedback. And yeah, let me know how your journey is going. I love to hear from people that are kind of going through these stages of life and getting to where they want to be. I think it's super inspiring. But yeah, use your internet. It is the best free resource to ever have been. So just Google a lot. Look at a lot of tutorials and just keep putting in the work, and I promise, it'll end up okay.
Great. And where can people find you? Is it best to just search your name on YouTube, or do you have your own URL at this point?
I think I have, it's like youtube.com/c/Namanh Kapur, and I'm sure my name will be somewhere in the podcast description, but or you can just look me up on the internet or on YouTube, Namanh Kapur, and that's everything about me.
Great. Well, Namanh, thanks so much for coming on. And for the audience, we will see you in the next one.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.